We are finally coming to a point in the evolution of product design where writing skills are appreciated right alongside research and visual design skills. Andy Welfle and Michael Metz are on a mission to accelerate this evolution. Their new book, Writing is Designing, gives writers and product managers tools that will help them integrate writing into user-focused design projects. Nowadays, in the most successful products, writing is no longer a late-stage add-on. It's now an integral part of the design process.
Welcome to the Content Strategy Insights podcast, where accomplished content strategy experts share their wisdom with our friends in the content community. We talk with professionals who work across the span of content strategy, from small businesses to big enterprises, from content design to content marketing, from solo consultancies to huge agencies. Our mission is to democratize content strategy, to make its principles and practices accessible to everyone. And now, here's your host, Larry Swanson.
Hi, everyone. Welcome to episode number 58 of the Content Strategy Insights podcast. I'm really happy today to have with us Andy Welfle and Michael Metz. They're the co-authors of Writing is Designing, a new book coming out from Rosenfeld Media. And I'd like each of you to tell the folks just a little bit more about yourself. Andy, you're first in my screen. So tell
Sure.
folks a little bit.
Yeah, I am a content strategist. I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. I moved out here about 5 years ago and worked for a little while on the very large Facebook content strategy team. And about almost 3 years ago, I left to go start a practice at Adobe Design, the centralized Adobe product design team. So I'll let Michael kind of get into it a little bit more, but he and I met and started doing some workshops about this very topic at Confab.
Right. Michael.
Yeah, so I initially set out to be a journalist, didn't see myself in UX at all, but made that transition. It seemed like a really good fit pretty early in my career. I've since have worked in a lot of different environments, from a software company to an agency. I'm now leading a conversation design team that works on AI products for a large insurance company, Allstate. And so a lot of different experience, but along the way met Andy, and we began to become aware that this area was increasingly in focus for a lot of companies and a lot of practitioners. And so we've just been teaching on the topic for a while, and really excited to have the book come out soon.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to seeing it. The table of contents looks really interesting. And so how many of did the book arose from these workshops that you've done at Confab and other conferences, right?
Yeah.
Yep. And tell me a little bit about those. I assume this is sort of the wrap up of the gleanings you've made in that workshop. Were there any kind of surprises as you went along the way? Like this is such a new field, and every day, like every conversation I have, I learn something new and get some new insight and some clarity about the practice of it. Can you tell me a little bit about your process and how the insights that led to the book kind of unfolded?
Yeah, it started very much as like the workshop started as like a voice and tone workshop, right? We talked about how to like establish a product or a interface voice, and how to use tone in strategic ways kind of throughout. I think both of us had thoughts around that were something we really wanted to share. But we started off doing half-day workshops at Confab Intensive and then Confab eventually. And then at some point we realized that this was only voice and tone were only like two small pieces of this like much larger whole. We just got a lot of feedback, and we realized that we needed to talk about like writing for clarity, and we need to talk about collaboration and critique and sharing, and of course testing and researching. So it actually really helped. We went to Singapore to do a 2 full-day workshop during Singapore Design Week, and that was actually really useful because it let us kind of like test out our book format with the group of people in workshop form, and really kind of showed us along the way where we needed to kind of expand and where we didn't need to go into much detail.
Mm-hmm. Michael, did you have anything you want to add to that? Or?
Yeah, I mean, I think it was like Andy said, it started as voice and tone, and I think those are topics that people were really interested in at the time because we were connected with the content strategy community, and often that's how a content strategist might contribute. They might be developing strategic direction for a team. But I think what's been interesting is that we've noticed, and this has happened in our own careers as well, there's a lot more tactical work that needs to be done, and a lot of ways to think about that work that are important, that the industry needs to be talking about more and more. So I think we've even seen the programming at conferences like Confab shift over time to be a lot more encompassing of actually what it means to write a good error message, for example, or how do you figure out what to put on that button in the first place. There's so much to be written in a digital product experience, and so that's really where the need for this book kind of arose. Is that there are a lot of people being hired to do this work now more than ever, and we just wanted to provide some ways for people to think about it.
Good. That kind of gets to, like, as I understand it, your mission in doing the book is to empower content people, no matter where they come from, because it is growing so quickly that you might be a graphic designer or a programmer or come from any number of fields and be tasked with this kind of writing. In your work with this, have you found all those people you're hoping to reach in your workshops and stuff, or are you constantly discovering new folks who are all of a sudden UX writers?
Yeah, I mean, it's great.
We found them all.
Every single one of them, no stone unturned.
Yeah. Sorry, Michael, go on.
Well, I mean, what you bring up is really neat, and really a cool part of this is that we always meet new people with backgrounds that are different from anything we've heard of or experienced in our own careers throughout this journey. We interviewed a lot of people for the book. That's one of the things that I'm really excited about, is that it's not just our voices, but other practitioners in the industry with different backgrounds and ways of working. So yeah, I mean, that's it's a pretty big element to this. Now, I mean, I think that, as you identified, like, there's all kinds of people who could be doing writing, whether it's like a product manager, or developer, designer. It's another thing to really, like, be passionate about doing the writing, you know? And so I hope too that, like, if any of those people happen to pick up our book because it's a passing interest, we start to help them see you know, what's involved in it and how exciting it could be, and how there's really a lot of depth that goes into this type of work. It's not just simply writing a label or an error message. It goes far deeper than that. There's a lot to learn about your users and about how they're experiencing the product and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. Andy, did you have anything to add to that, or?
No.
Okay.
I think Michael covered it. Yeah, it's lots of people who are responsible for words and just don't have the words to talk about it, right? Like, this is kind of giving them the rhetoric and the pieces to think about as they're writing.
Yeah, no, and what you just said about like it's way easier to get a journalist excited about words than it is to get a JavaScript programmer, you know, excited about it. In fact, last night I was riding home from a event with a friend who's a front-end coder at Microsoft, works on the Outlook app for iOS or some really specific thing, and I said, wow, and I had just done an interview. My last interview was with Kylie Hansen, who heads a huge UX team that has like embedded content designers all over the place. And so I kind of assumed that might be the case there, but he said, no, he writes the copy, like this programmer dude. Is that how common are you finding, like, you've probably got a pretty good feel at this point for who's doing this kind of writing. What percentage of it is word people, and what percentage of it is like design people, and what percentage would be like developer kind of folks?
I think that varies widely depending on the company. Like at Adobe, there's like, depending on like whatever product silo it is that you're talking about, it could be some marketing people who are generally thinking about words, but generally have kind of a persuasion, kind of value driven writing. Sometimes I've gotten really good at telling when a product manager or an engineer has written the copy, or like when a designer has written copy that I'm like going in to try to like fix or check out. But like, yeah, the trouble is like, I think it's when nobody really owns it that, you can get just like this wildly inconsistent copy. And that doesn't necessarily have to be a dedicated UX writer. I would love it to be, especially in our case. But yeah, I think as long as like there's some strategy and some discipline kind of behind that writing. It could be from anyone. It could be from any of those folks.
And I think from a practical perspective in the near term, it's likely to be almost anyone, right? Because it's such a fast growing discipline and so many needs for it and so few people who, are actually doing it now and trained in it. So.
Yeah, absolutely. I think a lot of companies tend to underestimate the need. And I think that that's something that will probably just happen organically as this continues to grow and people make the case for increasing headcount and bringing their teams up and all that. We'll start to see more of how this type of work is helping enable teams. But to me, it's interesting to think of too, like some of the reasons something might be written. Like you might need to write something because you can't ship your code unless you write it. So that reason is going to be really different versus if you're trying to accomplish something strategic in the user's journey, right? Like, so that's really interesting. Like some of this stuff just happens by accident, and even the teams where writers are on them may not have a sense of everything that's being written all the time because these systems are so complex and there's so many moving pieces and parts. Like maybe someone will reach out to the legal team for a policy about a certain feature, and that'll just be put in to the interface, and you may not know about it until later. So I think understanding that words are things that people use and interact with is pretty key for any team. And that's something that I think UX writers and content strategists bring to these organizations. They help people see this isn't just something you're putting in. This is something people interact with. It affects key business metrics like adoption and onboarding. It affects whether people are able to use the system at all. So to me, it's exciting because UX writers don't just do the writing, but they help teams see how critical words are and the success of the products they're working on.
Mm-hmm. And you've both had success at this because a lot of what you just talked about, Michael, is like you have to persuade people that like this is important and we should be more embedded in this and have and even have like proactive managers that are reminding us of the purpose and vision of this, not just like the deadline that's being met. Can you tell me a little bit about how you manage your writing design stuff in your practices?
Well, I mean, I wouldn't want to paint the picture that it's all sunshine and roses in whatever environment I've been in. Even the other day, I found out about some really important messaging that was supposed to be a part of a chatbot we were releasing that just wasn't there. For some reason, a team had decided to turn it off without telling anyone, and it was pretty critical to the usability. So we had to just sort of scramble to put that back into place. So like there are all sorts of things that happen all the time, and people tend to think of words like they're so innocent, right? Like you don't need Sketch, you don't need Figma to write. You just need your word processor. So people tend to think of words as like a really simple, inconsequential thing that really anyone can and should be working on. And I think what we're hoping is that people start to treat it with more intentionality.
Well, hey, I'm just wondering if there are lessons in that specific episode you just mentioned, Michael, that you had to convince. Okay, like oh my goodness, there's been a mistake here. We have to get that back. Like, how did you approach that? What was the?
Well, that's one of the things we talk about in the book. Chapter 8 is all about how to work with your teams, and I found the best way to do it is just by building strong relationships and contributing. And some of the best teams out there in this space are making sure that the writers they hire are embedded in a team and dedicated to that team's business problems and really working through it with them. So you don't, it's hard for it to happen by coming in and saying like, oh, you're doing this wrong, or, here are the regulations from on high that you need to follow. For me, the best success has been to join a team, usually working in some sort of Scrum model, and be a part of what they're doing, be a part of the work, and dedicate yourself to figuring out the problems with them. And then it organically comes to a place where they start to look to you when they encounter a problem that involves language, and they start to understand that you're a really valuable resource that can help the product become more successful.
Yeah, I think in that sense, you're a microcosm of the whole discipline right now that you're like each one of us has tasked with that. Andy, how about you? Do you have any good stories about how you've managed to persuade people to be more attentive to words?
Yeah, I think similar to Michael, when I started at Adobe, I was the only UX writer just among 300 designers, and I was trying to sort of like, find one area where I could go really deep and find another area where I could go really wide. And so I did start office hours, just allowing people to book like half an hour with me, which just from anywhere across the company. But that didn't do much to actually solve problems. But what it did do was allow me to just like meet these people and to establish a relationship and understand the problem space and give people really broad ideas on how to approach the writing and approach the word problems. But I did also find a product team. It was the admin console team. So if your business has like a large Creative Cloud account with like 30,000 people in it, this is the like interface that you use to distribute licenses and like access to people. And that was a really interesting team because it's very in depth and very configurable. There's a lot of words there, and it traditionally had a lot of very bad words there. And so what I tried to do is just go in and, as I was writing text strings, I was also trying to turn that into like little frameworks, and just really simple things like, hey, here's the difference between the word add in a button and the word create in a button, because those are different words, but sometimes people can use them kind of interchangeably. And so I basically just tried to create like a little one-pager about each of these things as I went along and distributed them. And they still have life. That was 2.5 years ago, and I've kind of moved on to management functions. But I think just kind of taking everything as like a teaching moment, just to really scale out is really important.
Yeah, I think, and that just seems that's a common theme, is because again, everything's so new that like somebody's got to educate folks about this. And hey, I want to. So this is all that we're kind of getting already off into management stuff, but I'm really curious too about the practice of this, like how you use writing and language as a design element and tool. Have your sort of experiences with this evolved over the last like 5 years? Tell me, because it seems like I don't know that anybody was using that kind of language 5 years ago, and here you are, and it just makes perfect sense talking about it that way.
Yeah, I think writing, the kind of tagline that just everybody uses that really like clicks for people is that this is designing with words. And Nicole Fenton had a really great blog post from 2013, Michael. She talks about words as design material, and that's really instrumental to the way that we think about it. And as we sit on design teams and talk to designers, that's really, I think, instrumental to approach writing. Like this isn't, we're not writing kind of like long form linear narratives that kind of can be fit into a box. We're defining what the box is in the first place, right? We're writing in a very like iterative way. Very, very specifically and collaboratively. That's really clicked for me, and it kind of helped me explain how we're doing it among a bunch of designers. But for sure, like, I think until I can't imagine a future where we're going to just sort of like be right there at the beginning, iterating along with designers, from the start. It's very, it's kind of our ideal, right? Like we have the idea of like a copywriter coming into the end so deeply ingrained in kind of the psyche of like a creative experience that it's really, kind of a struggle to get there, but it's a good one. And I think if you can turn it into sort of an educational moment, it's a lot of fun.
Well, and there are a few success stories of the people who managed to go upstream and get embedded from the start. I think Jonathan Coleman, like, I don't know if he took that job at Intercom because they operate that way or if they hired him to do that. But anyhow, they are integrated from the get-go. And similarly, Kylie Hansen at Microsoft on their Azure team and the AI team there, they have content designers embedded right alongside the data analytics and UI people and interaction designers and researchers and everybody right from the start. So there's a few success stories out there. But I guess let me ask each of you, what do you guess the percentage of places are that have content integrated from the get-go?
12.
That's a tough one. I mean, because I think it's always going to be about making choices about how your team is used. So to me, even if I worked I could speak to this. A big organization like Allstate, where I'm a part of, you have people embedded in critical work. And the other work you may have some advisory capacity for, but you're always going to, like, there's been pretty common knowledge, like with books out there, like Sense and Respond, that like members of the design team really should be embedded with the rest of the team and exploring these problems together. So the aha moment for me is just realizing that if you're a writer, you are also contributing to the team. You're also a designer. That is a pretty key moment. It's hard, I think, for writers, especially those who are new to the field, to start to think of their work as design, which is part of what we hope people come away from the book with, a sense that there's a lot more to it than just writing the words. So, I mean, when it gets into the practice, you're doing a lot more things like research. You're doing things like testing. You're involved in understanding what your users are going through. And it's really hard to be successful unless you do that. So I think even companies that have a small team are trying to work that way because they understand that that's how the most success happens, by being embedded in a team and focusing on those problems. I think some companies, it takes time to get there as they grow their practice, as they grow in maturity, but that's just part of it as the new discipline comes on board.
Yep.
I think size and age of the company depends a lot on, and just kind of like how forward the UX practices at a company makes a huge difference as far as, if writing is kind of treated like designing. Like Jonathan, for example, his company is like 8 years old, and I think he said he has like 25 or 30 people on the design team, which is amazing, and he's had really great strides there. Adobe is a 36-year-old company, and there's 300 people on the design team before we even started with any sort of content strategy practice. So it's going to take a little bit longer of time to catch up and to really like integrate ourselves into it.
Yep. No, and it occurs to me as both of you talk that it's really a two-level issue here. That, like, first of all, just getting UX integrated into engineering and product design teams is hard enough, and then getting content embedded into those UX teams is like the next step.
Yeah, and that's, honestly, I feel like there doesn't always have to be that distinction. I've been working as in terms of job title, I've been a designer for the past 5 or 6 years now, but writing has always been my focus in how I practice design. I would love to see more companies experiment with hiring product designers that have writing as a core skill set. I don't think you necessarily have to tie this to a specific job title, like UX writer, content designer, any of those things. I think it's a really important design skill, and it should be treated as part of the design team, regardless of how you structure it, how you set up your roles, the titles, and everything like that. So to me, it's really critical that design teams view it that way, that person with writing as their core skill set is also practicing design right along with them. Because if not, if that person's viewed, I was talking about this the other day, if that person is viewed as like being there to serve the designer's needs, to write whatever the designer needs them to write, then that person's going to be disillusioned and they're not going to be as effective in the work they're doing. So it's really critical that teams figure out how to make this part of how they design a product and not like build it on as like an add-on to their design function.
Yeah. You're reminding me, I can't remember who the presenter was, but 6 or 8 years ago, I saw a presentation about the T-shaped UX designer, that everybody should have a basic knowledge of research and UI design and interaction design and all that, and content strategy and all those things. But everybody should also have a deep specialty coming the vertical line of that T. And it also reminds me of this, that a lot of what you're talking about is roles, that all these roles have to unfold in any one project, and the individual person assigned to them, that can just be almost like scattergun depending on the team you've assembled. Is that mesh with your experience?
Yeah. I feel like I wish more companies would just be a little more flexible with that. Like there's usually a huge focus when you're hiring product designers around visual design skills. What would it look like if you hired some specifically for visual design and some specifically for writing? I think you could really benefit from that.
Yeah.
I think also, so at Confab last year, Erica Hall and I were just talking and joking about how, one reason why writers are not, are often undervalued is we don't have a complicated tool that nobody else can use. Like we don't have a Sketch or an XD or a Photoshop or whatever. So maybe that's the next tool we should build at Adobe, just some sort of a writing tool that nobody else, you have to get training to know how to use. But I definitely think that like it stems from the idea that like writing is, something that comes after, or, everybody can write, but like, writing an email and writing like a slide deck and writing interface language is all the same discipline. Like, that's not true. I think we all here know that, but a lot of people don't. And so once we can get people to see that, like, you know, writers have a trade, writers have a craft. It's something that, like, you know, designers should know how to do too, but like, if it's definitely one of those, you know, T-shaped skills, writing is just not part of that T. Like, it's just not considered.
No, you're right, because everybody has a word processor or text editor, and you need to, like, so Andy and Michael's magical mystical writing machine or something that this proprietary software
startup
that you
idea.
pay $20 a month. Yeah, exactly.
Yep. Gonna explore that vertical.
Yeah, but I mean, like, honestly, if you think about having worked as a designer, designers can have a tendency to use the tool as a gatekeeping mechanism. Just keep people away from the work. This is my work. I'm the designer. Me. You all look to me and my incredible work over here. And so writers are at the gate, like, at a disadvantage because they don't have a gatekeeping mechanism. They have to sort of win by the merit of gaining buy-in, building relationships, the merit of their ideas, solving problems for users. So to me, that is a little bit more, it's challenging, but it's also more exciting because you start to see where the real change happens in the user's life. You know, the merit is not just that you have created a deliverable, but you can point to, like, why you did it and why it was important, why it was critical for the user.
Yeah. Hey, you guys, I noticed this always goes so fast. We're coming up close to time. I always like to leave some room at the end. Is there anything last, like, or anything that's on your mind, anything we haven't talked about yet that about writing as designing, or anything that just hasn't come up that you'd like to make sure we get in before we wrap up?
I don't know. What do you think, Michael?
Well, I mean, I just, I'm excited that there's so much energy around this topic. And as you said, like, like Andy was saying, you know, like, you it's a craft. And I have no problem with anyone learning how to do that craft, but I think, like, it's important to start to highlight what goes into it and to start to develop some language around what makes writing for an interface or writing for a digital product different from writing marketing copy and you know, advertising, or even technical communication, things like that. Like, and not, and I think it's really important as we do that it's not about the roles, it's not about the job titles, it's not about defining and being really introspective, but about how we can help teams and really be a resource to them as people who work with words as a primary skill set. So to me, that's what's cool about this. That's what's exciting. But I think there's sort of a danger that we fall into just, like, looking at our own job titles and descriptions so much that we don't see the bigger problems we're all trying to solve.
Yeah. And from what you've said, Michael, almost everything you've said to this point, I think if you focus on the relationship building part of it and then let the titles and the exact scope and everything unfold as you're helping people solve problems. Yeah. Hey, Andy, you got anything last, or?
Not a lot. Just it was a complete pleasure to write a book with Michael. We are sort of, like, creative processes and styles are, like, different enough that they're very complementary to each other. I tend to just be very, like, scattered and, like, you know, write a little bit here and write a little bit there and over here and over here. And Michael's very steadying and can kind of pull everything together. So this book was a lot of fun to do, and I'm glad to be able to think about other things next year in 2020.
Right. Yeah, like everybody comes to this field from a different place. I started in book publishing. I was a book editor for many years, and I have midwifed many a book, and I know that relief that you'll feel as you hand the final manuscript to the publisher and go, "Give my baby to the world." Yeah.
Where did the quote come from? I hate writing. I love having written. Was that like Gertrude Stein or somebody like that?
I've heard that quote, but I can't recall the source.
It's so true. Yeah.
It's so. Well, congratulations on having written, to both of you. Yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Yeah. Well, thanks so much for coming on the show too. I really enjoyed the conversation.
Likewise. Thanks for having us.
Thank you for listening. If you can think of a friend who might enjoy this episode, please share it with them. And please join us again for our next content strategy interview.